Welcome to the latest episode of the Register's Kettle podcast. I'm Brandon Villarolo, and this week the topic is one that neither we nor the investors of the world can seem to stop thinking about, and that's the possibility that the edges of the AI bubble are beginning to come into focus. I'm joined this week by systems editor Tobias Mann and senior reporter Tom Claiborne to talk about the latest news in this space, and there's a lot to talk about. So thanks for joining me, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. So let's start with a piece our UK editor, Paul Kunert, wrote, and he couldn't be here for this episode. So we're going to have to pick it apart in his place. And that's the Bank for International Settlements report that it's worried that the AI bubble could pop and take the global economy with it. So, Tom, can you explain a bit about what was in that report and what they're worried about?
Yeah. So the Bank of International Settlements is sort of like a central bank for central banks, and or the UN of finance organizations, and
Yeah. So their opinion matters,
yeah,
basically.
it's not like some you know some person that doesn't really a blogger having an opinion. This is kind of like a
Right.
a big deal, and the report raises the specter of all the sort of previous financial manias, like the British railway mania of the 1800s, and
Hmm.
others thing the canal investment bubbles, and
Yeah. The dot-com
the dot
boom,
com bubble.
obviously. Yep. Yep.
And it draws a comparison, saying that they all these things sort of shared a common trait, which is that they attracted a lot more capital than the resulting industry could actually produce.
Hmm.
And, if that's the case with the AI bubble, there are going to be a lot of people who have invested billions in capex who are not going to see that money back. And, that's presumably not really the best investment scenario. And I think that that's on a lot of people's minds as, all these major hyperscalers keep pouring money into this.
Yeah.
And, in so doing, raising all the costs for the equipment that they're putting into place,
Hmm.
making it harder for everybody to get RAM, and even consumers to, in the end, buy computers because there's just no supplies of RAM left.
Yeah,
And
my god, my wife just bought a MacBook Neo the
yeah,
week before the price went up,
wow,
and it was like, "Oh my god." I just sent her an article, and I was like, "Well, you should be glad you bought that now because"
yeah,
and then she had some issue with the payment, and she was worried that it wasn't gonna go through and they were gonna reset the order,
mhm,
and then she had to pay more, but luckily that got cleared up in time. It was just yeah, it's affecting everyone, and I think what is it? To put some of these CapEx, forecasts in perspective, I think Amazon is saying that it's planning north of 200 billion in AI buildouts this year. Microsoft is looking at 190 billion, Google 180 billion, Meta 140 billion. I mean, this is a lot of money being tossed around for potentially no returns, right?
yeah,
Well, and some of it is kind of empire building with the major
Sure.
hyperscalers. Because if you look at their business models, they can afford to lose a sizable portion of that. Their
Mhm.
investors aren't going to be happy, but their investors won't be happy if they're not spending that money either. So it
Right.
becomes a catch 22 for them. But in the event the bubble pops, you can bet Google, Amazon, Microsoft are going to ultimately be fine and have built their empires.
Sure.
It's everybody else that is the problem as far as I can tell.
Right, which is what the BIS hit on, right? I like that a lot of that report kind of focuses on what could happen to the hyperscalers, which, like you said, they'll survive, right?
right,
But it's all the people sort of downwind of them, not just consumers and not just, small equipment manufacturers and small businesses that rely on their components and their cloud. But, what is it? I think the report mentioned, Tom, like suppliers, construction firms, all these different people who could potentially be affected if these projects collapse.
yeah, and it's not just the sort of people in the industry that are building these data centers. It's the assumptions that rest on all these customers who are going to be then buying these AI services. What if
Mhm.
they don't come, or what if they have a different idea of what they want to spend? And you're starting to see that with a lot of pushback from people. I was just working on another story about that includes some comments from Palantir CEO Alex Karp, who's talking about
Mhm.
the how enterprises are very unhappy with this very gate kept world of frontier AI, where there's very little transparency and control, and ultimately enterprises skew towards being able to control their spending, be able to switch providers, and it's not always possible at any given time, but that's what they're going to push for, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure on everybody in this ecosystem to deliver open source models, affordable models, to pricing that's predictable, and not have this crazy situation that you have now with someone like Anthropic where things just get turned off, or you try and do a security related query and it just says, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
Yeah.
It's not really a viable long term you know scenario that people are going to use this on a regular basis.
Right. I mean, and that's the same with token costs keep
Yeah.
fluctuating
Mhm.
and going up. And I think Karp in that interview, which I think it aired on CNBC on the 1st of July,
Yeah.
he was talking about, another big thing, and this has been a concern right since the dawn of large language models, is where is the data that these businesses are, if you're a customer and you're basically using one of these big frontier labs to host your stuff or to process your stuff. I mean, they're ingesting all that knowledge, right? Whether we can debate over how they're using it, right? And their terms of service are always kind of very specific, but there's a concern, right? If you're giving your company's secrets over to these large firms, that there's the potential that they could benefit from those things
Mhm.
too. It just seems like there's a million and one possibilities. I mean, obviously, Karp was pushing Palantir as the solution to that.
Right.
Whether you believe that or not is another thing altogether. But I mean, he made a lot of really good points in that interview. Like he called himself Crazy Carp, and right every time I hear him speak, I always am kind of reminded of just how uh, manic he can be. But he always makes some pretty good points.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if you look at what Apple is doing with its private cloud compute, and I guess which Google has also copied, probably recognizing that that's going to be a real thing, is ultimately a lot of these workloads are going to have to move toward that model where it is the data is kept out of these large frontier clouds and are is processed to some degree you know, on premises or in a data center that the company has control over, because
Hmm.
it's just not, acceptable to sort of send off all this sensitive data and hope for the best.
Yeah,
And I
right.
think
And that's
Apple's playing a good long-term game with its sort of hardware story. And I think that there will be other players in this space that, you know, have sort of similar offerings.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna have to. I feel like, there is a lot of souring, on companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and those frontier labs. A lot of people are just kind of, fed up with the inconsistencies and what have you. Um, speaking of the big labs, OpenAI, I feel like in this this current kind of bubble environment that we're living in, OpenAI is kind of inextricably tied to Oracle, right?
Mhm.
Through some of the big deals they've made, and it was one of the big hyperscalers I didn't mention up above because Tobias, you wrote a story this week about, I think it was an SEC filing from Oracle recently that basically is an outline of all the things that might go wrong. Um, and it's extensive.
Yeah,
So
no, it was a
yeah, what were
long
they talking
list.
about? Yeah, oh god, it
Right.
was huge.
So, in the view of looking at SEC filings on a fairly regular basis, you see a lot of boilerplate.
Mhm.
This was not boilerplate. This was
No.
actually fairly specific to the challenges that they could potentially face. Um, OpenAI has, entered into this partnership initiative, whatever you want to call it, called Stargate about a year and a half ago now. And Oracle was one of the major founding partners alongside SoftBank and MGX. Um,
Mhm.
as it turned out, Oracle was going to be one of the primary financiers of this data center build out. And to the tune of $300 billion of this
Right.
$500 billion project over the course of this indeterminate period of time. The numbers just keep getting bigger though.
Right, and I
Um,
think Oracle was mentioning, I think, either I or you or someone wrote about it, like, last November about they were gonna have to borrow $25 billion a year
yeah,
to afford to pay for this, right? And that was, again, without any guarantee that OpenAI was ever gonna turn enough profit to pay back its share.
right. And OpenAI, in case anybody's forgotten, can't pay its own bills. It has to find
Right.
somebody to who's willing to provide cash in exchange for equity or debt. So
Mhm.
it's the kind of thing that you find yourself in a situation where you are renting property because Oracle doesn't own its own data centers for the most part,
Mhm.
and then leasing it to a customer who says, "Yeah, yeah, I'm good for the rent. It's going to be ready in 2027, 2028, right? Okay, yeah, yeah, we're going to need a lot though. Does that work?" And just like going ahead with it. What like,
Yeah, taking
yeah,
it
this is
completely on
totally going
faith.
to the company that doesn't make money and is entirely reliant on venture capitalists to fund this is totally going to be able to pay their cloud bills. And we I think anybody who's been paying attention over the last year since Stargate was announced has been scratching their heads going, "How exactly is this supposed to work? Isn't
Yeah, oh my
this?"
god, I always cite this $300 billion kind of investment with, open I always cite this as a prime example of just the sort of absurdity in AI financing right now. It's just top of the list for me whenever people are like, "Well, what's wrong with AI financing?" or blah, 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 blah. I get into conversations so often where Oracle and OpenAI come up because 'cause I'm just like, Here's a picture of this. This is the quintessential example of the insanity of this."
And so now with this SEC filing, we now get Oracle saying what we've all kind of been asking. How is
Mhm.
this risk even remotely manageable? And the reality is, it does really feel like Larry has put his fingers over his ears and is going, la, 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 everything's fine.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and they put themselves in this position where they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Yeah, I think you said that exact thing in the story, right? And I think Tom, you alluded to this earlier too, right? If you don't build this empire, your investors are going to be pissed. So you got to build the empire, but there's a good chance you're building it on a swamp, right?
Yeah.
Where foundations are not going to be
Well,
stable.
and every so often you hear stories like the one that I think came out of the Financial Times today, where about OpenAI, floating the idea of the U.S. government taking a 5% share in the company. I mean,
Right.
I suspect that that's the worst case scenario for a lot of these companies. Like, well, at least we'll get the government to bail us out, and we can, you know, shed the risk and let the public take care of it. But I don't know that that's really going to be a very appealing option.
I mean, you can paint it as a sovereign wealth fund, right? That's what it seems like they're all doing. OpenAI was like, we're doing this for the public good, right? So you can all benefit from our eventual collapse.
Right. The problem with the bubble is that when it pops, and I think at this point it's a question of when and not and how bad,
Yep. Yeah.
not a matter of if. Oracle could find itself holding the bag because is signing these commitments to with all of these data center partners, Crusoe being one of the big recognizable names in this,
Hmm.
the builder behind the Stargate facility in Abilene. They have made all these commitments, and they're in a position to honor those commitments, but it's all based on a promise that, you know, OpenAI is gonna come through and actually pay for it.
Right.
Um, if OpenAI fails to can't pay its bills, the other 100 and what, $155 billion of committed capacity that they or promissory, capacity that they're, uh, entitled to provide, that's probably also not happening, and so
Yeah.
it's just like I said, it's like leasing property to release to somebody else who, you know, may or may not be able to pay it, but probably can't.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Sounds a little bit like the WeWork business model.
we all know how well that went,
Yeah.
right? Let's talk about some more of the specifics they cited because there was more than just sort of the ties to OpenAI that were risky. Um, I think we talked. You mentioned kind of like there's no guarantee that those leases are going to get paid or even renewed, right? So they might be on the hook for then unpaid leases that get abandoned. So you have
Right,
a whole
right.
bunch of extra compute.
OpenAI is arguably the AI flag bearer
Uh,
of this whole bubble, and if they can't pay their bills, like I said, who is going to take that space? Who is going to be able to fulfill that commitment?
yep.
Um, So there's definitely that, if they might be okay if OpenAI says, "Hey, we can get a better deal over here," because that seems like a
Mhm.
very Sam Altman thing to do. But, if they actually can't pay their bills, it is an open question of who is going to take that capacity.
Yeah, probably no one, right? I mean, Anthropic? Who? XAI? XAI can't even fill their own data centers with their own loads, right? You're hearing all the time about like how I've heard multiple stories recently about how XAI is leasing space to other AI companies because they've got all this extra hardware lying around that they're not using.
They thought they could engineer their way out of the, heterogeneity problem. They deployed Colossus, and they used
Mhm.
a couple different, generations of accelerators thinking that they were gonna be able to make it work. Turned out to be really rather problematic, and it became easier for them to go build it properly with Colossus
Right.
2 than and lease out that original space. That's my understanding of how that actually
Okay.
played out.
I see. Okay.
Um,
Gotcha. 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 That's good to know. I didn't understand the specifics there. But let's see, what else was Oracle warning about? Needing to balance their demand estimates properly, I think, which again, it seems like be a function of the
Right.
space and whether or not those leases are gonna be paid. And then there was down to the fact that they might have trouble just getting the data centers they need to build built in the first place.
Right.
I think there was mentions of, permitting, the worry about a growing number of moratoriums around the country, power sourcing issues. This all of this kind of combines to not look good for Oracle, and like you said, they could very well get stuck holding the bag for this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there's a certainly a political, sort of populist sentiment that's growing against AI data centers that
Mhm.
makes this even harder in a lot of communities. I mean, there are a lot of company in places where people just don't want this to happen, and
Yeah.
that's not something you can just sort of wish away.
yeah. There's a lot of
No.
factors that Oracle has no control over, or
Mhm.
any of these big hyperscalers don't have a lot of control over. Power is one of the big ones that you know they can, especially if they're leasing, they might sign a lease agreement with a company like Crusoe who says, "Yeah, we can build that." But then that Crusoe may run into permitting issues. They may not be able to secure adequate power. The utility boards may say, "Yeah, no." And if they
Mhm.
push ahead, they could then alienate themselves and create controversy that is too much for the 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 the, the customer Oracle or whatever hyperscaler that's trying to lease it to even touch. If
Yeah.
they say, "Yeah, we can build that," and then don't say that they're gonna have to use a bunch of, portable gas generator plants outside of it that are just belching smog and just completely alienate that or is completely incompatible with their sustainability goals, it
Mhm.
just becomes this situation of just, "Yeah, we thought we could get capacity, but we can't, and so we can't actually realize the revenue that we made all these decisions based on."
Yeah, and it seems like Oracle investors are already starting to realize that maybe before the company did, right? Because I mean, they're not exactly financial the stock's not doing great, right? They're down, I think, more than 40% in the past month, is that right?
Yeah, since they reported their Q4 earnings, earlier last month,
Mhm.
and at that time, even then, their stock was slipping pretty precipitously in spite of the fact that revenues were up and their
Mhm.
profits were healthy. The impact and kind of exposure that Oracle has is arguably among the worst of the hyperscalers because, as I was saying earlier, Meta has a massive business for advertising that can happily run on GPUs. It may not be as profitable, but they can find a use case for it. And arguably, that's
Right.
where most of their money is coming from right now, anyway. All of the other cloud providers have similar business models to that effect that will
Yeah.
carry them through, even if the big promise of AI turns out to be even more of a nothing burger than 5G.
Yeah. So, I mean, so what are we seeing? Like, is Oracle the canary in the coal mine for this whole thing, so to speak? Are we looking at, the edges of that bubble starting to form and firm up and get closer to popping? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that there's I can't think of another company that is, exposed in the same way.
Mhm,
And I mean, there just are a lot of sort of things that need to align for things to really pop. And right now, there's still, you know, investment happening and talk about the golden goose of AI.
mhm.
But I think that give it another quarter or two, and there's going to be a lot more pressure. And I think that the geopolitical situation, a lot of things are just not going along in a way that look good for things. And I think we may see a few of these companies really feel the heat soon. And a lot of this also depends upon how long the big frontier companies can sort of sustain the illusion that this is really something that's affordable and accessible to everyone before they have to raise prices to really account for the cost of business.
I mean, they've already done that, right? I mean, like, I feel like we've seen token costs go up quite a bit recently because, they're not getting enough uptake, or they're starting to realize they've got enough there that people actually want to use this. But I mean, 6 of 1, I think, when you look at it in terms of what companies are saying versus the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would jump in to say I think Tom's onto something here. Um, I think we're coming up on the squeeze where uh, the need to demonstrate profitability is going to become a major deciding factor of how much longer this bubble lasts.
Mhm.
Because a squeeze can go two ways. You squeeze, you raise prices, and you see how sticky the products have become. If you're lucky, they're really sticky and people are going to put up with higher costs because it has wormed its way into their lives or their business practices and they can't actually walk away from it. The risk is if you have to raise prices too high, you can run into a situation where the market just can't bear the burden. And that I think is where kind of we reach kind of the limit of how big this bubble can grow.
Right. And you start to think about how often you hear about Chinese models. It's a direct reflection of that. And when prices go up for OpenAI and for Anthropic, and all of a sudden people are going, those Chinese models are not so bad. That's telling you something.
Yeah.
And the shift towards open source or whatever is gonna push against the ability of these companies like OpenAI and Anthropic to generate a profit. And their hope seems to be, well, we'll just get the government to ban those, everything that's competing with us. But I don't know how well that's going to work out.
Well, especially when, you if you're a business, you decide, "Oh, I'm gonna go build my new cybersecurity suite on Mythos." And you're live for 2 weeks, and then the US government can come in and say, "Well, actually, no," and now your company just implodes. I mean, that's a
Yeah, and I mean, how long
talk
did
about
that
risk.
ban that yeah, and that ban lasted, what, 2 weeks? So, in the meantime, your company may have collapsed, right? And all of a sudden, now it's back and it's available again, so you're yeah, there's no reason to believe that the government won't keep being fickle about this as new advancements come up or as the next company says, "Well, we've got this amazing new model that can do this amazing new thing," and the government's like, "Well, then we're not gonna let you release it until we get our hands on it and test it," and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting over the next couple of months as to how this plays out and the way the market adjusts to this kind of new reality. I've said it before, but we are starting to see the hardware change because the cost of running these models is just so intense, and you can't run them at a loss forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also see this in the software too. I mean, like everything that I see in terms of, development that has to do with, how you harness and use a model is geared towards using it less. These are, innovations like, oh, how can we capture more context so that the model doesn't, use as many tokens? And how can we basically reduce our spend? And that's, you know,
I don't know, it's just kinda funny. How can we use this amazing thing that we swear is gonna
Right.
transform our
How
business
can we use it
less?
less? And, the people like, "Oh, well, you don't actually need a frontier model for, more than like, 25% of your queries." And, it's like that kind of, sort of parsing of how you want to do your workloads is very telling. And if the big companies aren't paying attention to that, they're going to find very quickly that someone else has come up with a way to sell this at a much more transparent, affordable, and reliable way.
It
Yeah,
can't
it's
be
gonna be interesting.
understated
Yeah.
how complicated this technology is from,
Mhm.
from the ground that it's set on to the facilities that are built, to, how you provide power to it and how you run those services. This is i- just insanely complicated. So the number of levers to pull and buttons to press in order to optimize this are many. The problem is that's a slow process that, so long as there's lots of money, doesn't typically happen.
Yeah.
Once the venture capitalists stop dumping cash into this, I think we'll see that a lot more. Whether that's enough to sustain it, uh, it's so hard to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see, right? Like you said, we're coming up on the squeeze here. A couple more quarters or maybe a year before a lot of these bills are gonna come due, and people are gonna wanna see results, and we'll see what happens after that. There's still websites, there's still railroads, there's still electricity, so clearly a bubble popping doesn't mean it'll go away. It's just gonna have to find a way to do things more efficiently. And no matter what happens, we'll probably be right here on the kettle to talk about it. So thanks for tuning in this week, and we will talk to you soon.